What's up, Broncos? Future Nick here, coming live from when we know that Joe Biden has actually won the presidency. Just wanted to hop in to provide some context to you guys that the discussion you're about to hear all happened on November 5th, so please keep in mind that we didn't have all the answers going into it. It was kind of a crazy Thursday. That being said, we still thought these were awesome discussions with some really great guests, and we hope that you guys enjoyed as much as we and enjoyed having them. This is going to be one part of a three-part election special, so if you enjoyed this, please make sure you check out the other two. And with that being said, Broncos, enjoy.
Welcome back, Broncos, and for our first guest, we have the esteemed editor-in-chief of the Poly Post. She's been providing great coverage of the election all election season this semester. You, of course, know her from her appearance in our first season episode of the Poly Pod. It is our pleasure to welcome Daniela Avila back to the show.
Hi, guys. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah,
Thank you for being here. I guess our first question would be, how did you spend election night and how much sleep did you get?
That would be absolutely none, because I think I might have stayed up until about midnight, just watching TV and kind of watching all the numbers roll in. But it's just a crazy time because, with like the different news networks that you're watching, you're getting different numbers, you're getting different results everywhere that you go. And so that's what makes it a little bit frustrating, right? And so I think that the average person might ask themselves, like, which media outlet am I supposed to be trusting, right? Which one of these are actual numbers? And for the most part, even though some states were already being called, they weren't completely finished, right? And so I just decided to call it by midnight. And I said, you know what, I'm going to wake up in the morning and see what happens. Though I had a sneaky suspicion that we wouldn't have our results in by the next morning. And so I kind of just felt like I didn't really sleep at all, because I went to sleep thinking about it and I woke up thinking about it, right? And it's just been going like this. It's just been this ongoing process since. So that's kind of why I have these bags under my eyes, because I haven't stopped thinking about it. But that's pretty much how my election night went. Election week.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, 12 is a respectable time. I think that's about when I knocked out. Wasn't really too sure. Everything was kind of blending together at that point. I was already a couple drinks in, and it was getting late. And it's like, please just let this end.
Right. It's like, just give us the answer. We just have to know for some peace of mind.
Exactly.
If even then.
Yeah, I think I went to sleep, or I gave up at about midnight like you guys, but I was up till 3 a.m, but that's because I do that anyway. But yeah, I gave up at about midnight. I knew as soon as I saw Trump come out and give his speech about how as far as he's concerned, he's already won. I'm like, all right, it's going to be a long week.
Right. But I think we all kind of saw that coming, right? I think we all suspected it. Yeah, we knew that was going to happen. And so we can't really take his word for it, even when he does say stuff like that. Yeah, but I think probably the worst thing of all is that, you can shut off your TV, but in most of the time when people want to get some type of distraction or some type of get away from what's going on TV, you go on social media, right? And so you try to scroll through Instagram, through Twitter to find some lighthearted stuff, but on election weekend, that's just not going to happen, right? Like, that is all you're seeing. And don't get me wrong, these election memes are hilarious, and I think that's what's kind of kept the mood light these past few days. But wherever you go, that's all people are talking about. And I think we're used to it just being one night. I remember sitting my senior year at an election party. And it was a stressful time then, but at the same time, I didn't know much back then. And so it doesn't compare to what I'm feeling right now. And this feeling is just prolonged. And so I think that a lot of us are kind of going through that, especially us that are around this age, right? And so it might have been like our first time voting. It was my first time voting. I was 17 back then, so I didn't really have a say. So it's an intense time.
And speaking of that, how do you plan for the Poly Post? Like, do you have an idea of how you want the Poly Post to cover the fallout of this election? Like, what are your plans for it? Tell me so I can know what the budget is going to be, since I have
Right. So I have been thinking about this a lot. And I haven't gone too into detail about it, just because I think that when this is all over, Georgia and I are going to come together and we're going to decide exactly how we want to go about this. Georgia's the managing editor. And I definitely want to get into each proposition, because we obviously had proposition coverage before on what could or could not happen, whether or not they passed, because there was a lot of important things on the ballot this year. And so just depending on how those go, I believe we do have some solid answers for some of the propositions by now, but we still need to wait a little bit more on that. So I want to get into detail about how each proposition affects each student at Cal Poly, right? Because they definitely do. Cal Poly is such a diverse group of students, and I think it's really important to highlight why these propositions matter, why it was important for them to pass or not to pass, and what those consequences and repercussions might be because they did or didn't. And so that's just in terms of propositions. And I think just like on a broader issue, the presidential election is really important too. You know, just because it's on a national level doesn't mean that it doesn't affect students, you know, and like students specifically at Cal Poly. And so I think that, you know, I think especially right now, a lot of people that are in college are millennials, right? And millennials are very progressive. And I think, to be completely honest, most people would say that they voted for Biden, and most people are kind of rooting for him, right? And so I think whatever comes out of this election is gonna make a really big difference on how students feel about going to school, you know, about paying their tuitions, about just about a lot of issues, you know. These are important topics to be talked about, and so I really want to hear students' voices.
Well, that's pretty interesting that you mentioned students' voices, because we were kind of wondering, like, have you observed any reactions from the student body yet? Like, I'm sure I've been texting Nick about it. We've been talking about it in the Zoom meetings for the Poly Post, but like, have you talked to a lot of students? Like, what do you think, or what is your observations of the student body's reaction been?
I think that everybody's just kind of on edge right now. You know what I mean? Just because right now the numbers are so tight, but I think for the most part, I'm getting the sense that everybody's a little bit disappointed, you know, because I think going into this, everybody, obviously there was some doubt, you know, but I think that everybody was expecting Biden to just kind of take it, you know what I mean? Because how could he not, you know, with like everything going on in the world with coronavirus, this national unrest, it was almost like ridiculous to think that you could favor Trump, you know, especially during a time like this. But I think that the numbers are actually showing that this country is very divided. And you know, like Nicolas said earlier, that there's been a record number of voters this year, you know, but I think that even though there was a record number of voters, those numbers are showing that our country is very divided, and more so than we even thought. You know, I think that the past like protests and like everything that's been going on already showed that, but it's really showing with the numbers now. And so just going back to what you said, I think that everybody's on edge. You know, most of what I'm saying is based on Twitter and based on what my friends are telling me, and it's just a waiting game. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think it's very interesting. And we're going to get to this, I think, with the rest of our guests. We're going to kind of get their perspective on this point that we'll flesh out later in the show. But you bring it up now, I think it's important to talk about the expectation. The expectation for a lot of people, especially if they were Democrats or they were liberal leaning, which like young people disproportionately are, not all, but young people disproportionately are. And it's just interesting that everyone was expecting, you know, with some reservation, but most people expected that supposed blue wave. You know, people were expecting Biden to sweep this. And like you said, just not getting even away from like how you feel about Biden and Trump respectively, just based on like historical precedent, Donald Trump is an incumbent president proceeding over a global pandemic, a response I think that everyone can kind of agree, like at the best hasn't been great, and at worst has been an abject failure in terms of like policy. He's also overseeing an economy that is on an economic downturn because of the pandemic. And he's also presiding over one of the largest social unrest movements we've seen in American history. So all those factors, again, just taking away whether or not you support Biden or Trump, just those factors alone, it seemed like nonsensical, like you said, to assume that this was going to be, you know, anything less than a sweep for Biden, or, you know, at the very least, it wasn't going to be this close. A lot of people did not expect, and I think this has been hitting a lot of people, like blindsiding them, because they weren't ready for this. They weren't ready, which is kind of funny given that, the unprecedented things that happened in 2016. You would think people would be a little more like cautious, but everyone still went in with a bit of hubris, I would say, thinking that this was going to be, a absolute sweep across the board. And we're seeing that that's just not it.
Right. Right. And I think that's what people are most concerned about right now. Right. And so for the most part, going back to students, this is the first election that they're really paying attention to. Right. And the first election that's really going to affect them. And so I think about this even for myself, you know what I mean? Like, whatever comes out of today or this weekend is what's going to be, in place for the next 4 years. Right. And so I'm graduating this year. And so I'm going straight into the workforce as soon as I graduate. And so this is the president that I'm really going to be affected by, and I think that a lot of us kind of have like that same mentality. And even if you are like maybe like a freshman or a sophomore, this is going to affect how you're paying for your school. There's just a lot at stake here.
Absolutely. And, before we move on to, I think like our last question, let's kind of stay on the topic of like the youth vote and like talking about specifically our generation, in terms of like us as a growing and it's inevitable. We are going to be the majority eventually. We are an ever growing voting bloc. But let's talk about those demographics real quick. I believe when I was looking at the numbers, even though we've had record number of people turning out to vote, there hasn't been a huge uptick in terms of like our generation of younger people turning out this election, at least compared to like 2016. Like the numbers haven't dramatically shifted. There have been more of us, but it just hasn't been a huge leap in terms of turnout. What do you think accounts for that demographic shift, where even though we have more people voting, in terms of our younger voting bloc, we haven't turned out as dramatically?
Right. Oh, I think that's a very interesting question. I think part of the reason why may be just because I think there's just a lot of confusion going on right now, So I think that something that's really come to life these past few years probably is the fact that social media has played such a vital role in the news, right? And so there's a lot going on with misleading information, disinformation, and so I think that people around our age might just feel too confused to vote is probably what I'm thinking, like they're probably seeing left and they're probably seeing right and they don't know which to believe. And so I feel that even though we have been pushing for it, like all over, so people have been saying, get out and vote, get out and vote. You've seen celebrities, you've seen people of higher power, encouraging people to go out and vote. I think people are still afraid to make that decision just because they've realized how important it could be, right? And so, I have some friends that didn't go out and vote, and when people ask them, they say that they did, but they actually didn't. And the reason for that is because they say that, they feel like they just don't know enough, and it's too important of a decision to make. And so, I think maybe, or I also think that some young people might think that their vote actually doesn't matter, which is kind of like, like the exact opposite, And I remember thinking the same thing when I was 17, because when you're first introduced to how the electoral college vote versus like the popular vote, going back to 2016, I thought it was ridiculous that Hillary lost, even though she got the popular vote, right? I thought, how could that be? If the majority of people in this country want her to be president, why is she not, right? And so I think that when it comes down to it, some people might just have the mentality that it doesn't really matter who I vote for. It's not up to me, and I really think that that's what some people are thinking right now.
Well, let's tease that out a little bit. If you believe that it's not just confusion, but it's like apathy is the stronger like depressor of like the youth vote. I was gonna say, like, do you believe it's purely apathy in that like people think that like my vote doesn't matter, so why go out? Or do you think it's people being like, there's no positive reason for me to go out? Like there's nothing on offer for me to like really vote for and be engaged with?
I think it's probably going to have to be the first one in terms of why people don't vote. Like I think I like I said before, I think there is this really strong group of people who do want to go out and vote and do want to go out and make a difference. But yeah, I would have to go with the first reason.
I would offer a third option too. And this is something that Nick also kind of got into, but I would say disillusionment in general would be a major, well, maybe not major factor, but a pretty significant factor into why people, specifically the people that don't show up to the polls. I'm not saying that everyone that voted is disillusioned. I'm saying a good chunk of the people that don't show up to vote is because of disillusionment. And I think it's just because, you were saying like earlier, like social media plays such a big role in the news cycle now. And I recently became aware of a term that I didn't even know existed before the election, for election day, and it's called doom scrolling. And it's basically where you're just going through and just watching all the doom and gloom of social media. And I mean, look at the last 4 years we've had and the tone of social media over the last 4 years and the tone of the news. Like, I would not be surprised if at this point there are some people who are just so sick of hearing about it and are so disillusioned by it that they simply didn't show up to it.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you know, like that just goes back to the fact that there's no filter, you know, like luckily within the last few months, especially because of the election, some of these major big tech companies have been filtering it and have been censoring people who do spread misinformation, you know, and there has been better efforts toward that, but I don't think that we're exactly there yet. You know, people can still go out there and post whatever they want, whether it be true or it's not. And it's really up to each individual to be able to differentiate that kind of information.
Yeah, I mean, like, just kind of first of all, I just want to say, like, I agree full-heartedly with Andy in terms of like voter apathy being more driven by just a disillusionment with politics in general. People have kind of been failed repeatedly, and I can't blame them. You know, for the half of the country like that doesn't vote, I can't really blame them for not turning out if they feel that way. You know, I would disagree with it, but I understand it completely of where they're coming from. But kind of speaking about the news, just jump into our last question before we let you go here. What's an aspect of this election that you feel like should have been covered more thoroughly?
An aspect of this election that should have been covered more thoroughly. I feel like right now, a really big thing, the really big things that are being covered right now is obviously the presidential election right now. That's what everybody's talking about. But I think that at least for most people that don't follow politics like avidly, I think it's important to realize like to realize how important it is about who you vote for and that House Representatives and who ends up in the Senate, right? Because I think that was something that a lot of people were waiting for, but don't really realize the big impact that it has and what kind of decisions that those organizations hold, right? And so I think it's really important for people to just inform themselves about the decisions that they make, the power that they hold, so that they realize what kind of impact it's making when the results do come out. You know, like, for example, we've been waiting for the COVID-19 package, the second COVID-19 package to come out for months now, right? Congress has been pushing it back for months. And so there's people, you know, who maybe don't even have money to eat because they lost their jobs because of COVID, right? And so that's something that's really important right now and something that Congress keeps pushing back. And so these are the same people who are going to continue to make those decisions, you know, decisions that impact people in their daily lives. And so, yeah, like, I think it's important to note, like, who are the people in these positions of power and why we want them there and what kind of differences they're going to make for us.
No, I completely agree. And I mean, this show, we have a firm stance on the side of like local politics is important and people should be informed about that because that affects you more directly. Like for like anyone listening, like the president is one thing, but that's so abstracted from your life that it doesn't really affect you in the grand scheme of things, unless you just, you know, broaden it out to like wide sweeping policies. But the things that actually affect you, the things that you will like experience day to day is on the local level.
Right. And kind of to add to that, that's kind of what I've been saying for a while now, you know, like we're putting so much attention on this presidential election. And while it is really important, and I do think that it's going to make a big difference, I really think that there's just a lot of questions that are up in the air right now. You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of changes that people want to see that we just haven't been seeing within these past few years, you know? And I really think that if we want to see change, we have to start at a local level, you know? You have to start with the people in your communities, in your state, and then from there, it'll move up to a national level, you know? And so that's where our focus should be, you know? People should try to get involved as much as they can, because some people might think that their opinions don't matter, but they really do.
Even on the national level, people say, oh, votes don't count if you live in a blue or red state and you vote against it or whatever, but it's now coming down to the wire of the razor thin wire of they are now reporting on like 3,000 votes coming in, which in any other election you'd be like 3,000 votes, like what is that, like a city? You would not care. But now it's coming down to like they're reporting on counties, the results of counties, so it does matter. It really does.
Right. And I think that, every election year is different, and I think that just goes to show how much it does matter, because you don't know what everybody else is thinking. I think social media portrays things one way, and it might seem like a majority is skewing one way, but in fact it could be the other. And so that's why it's so important to kind of just contribute to that.
Completely agree. And with that, Andy, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to say thank you again for coming on, and thank you in advance for the objective and thorough coverage that the Poly Post will be providing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Daniel. We really appreciate having you on. Always a pleasure, always a joy. So happy we could actually get you on season 2 of the Poly Pod. Had to bring it back. And just thank you so much for the awesome discussion. Where can folks find you on Twitter?
Oh gosh, guys. Okay. Here's the problem. Okay. So I made my Twitter account, I think when I was in middle school, and I got one of those automated usernames. And so never changed it. Don't ask me why, but I guess if people really want to know, it's at Daniela, Daniela 794108892. Not your typical username, but that's how you find me.
Oh my God. People are going to think you're a bot.
It's specific though. It's very specific.
Yeah, I think I kept typing in like combinations between like my first name, my last name, and my favorite numbers, and it just wasn't working out. And I was like, I think this is just the way that it needs to go.
All right. Well, as bot sounding as your ad is on Twitter, we're going to go ahead and put that up on the screen for folks to follow. Make sure you check out the Poly Post. Make sure you follow Daniela to keep up on the latest and greatest coverage that the Poly Post is inevitably going to be producing with the fallout of this election. Stay tuned for that. And again, Daniela, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And with that, Broncos, we're going to move on to the next guest.
And moving on to our next guest, he is the copy editor of the Poly Post and has been doing a great job all semester, not only of catching all our grammatical mistakes, but also providing excellent election coverage. It is our privilege to introduce Nicolas Hernandez.
Hi, how are you guys doing? I'm a long-time listener, first-time guest. Excited to be here.
Glad you are here. And there's no more perfect episode for you to be here than this one.
Yeah, I think my political science double major is gonna hopefully help here.
Yeah, and every time we're in class, you're always the one that like contributes something. I'm like, whoa, I didn't even like think about that.
Right.
So
we wanted nothing but the best for this episode.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. We got one of the all-stars here. So thank you for coming, Nick.
Of course, yeah.
I guess we're going to start off with our first question, which is the question we're asking all of our guests. How did you spend election night, and how much sleep did you end up getting?
Election night itself, I was pretty tuned in starting 4 when East Coast polls were closing. Stayed pretty glued to the TV until probably around 11.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was watching it the whole time with my parents. They went to sleep. I kind of kept watching on and off probably until 1 a.m.
I mean,
Nice.
Hey, that's a lot earlier than probably a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so.
Especially given how tired everyone looked in our Zoom classes, like they had to have been up later than that.
Yeah, and I stayed up. That probably dumb. Yesterday I also stayed up pretty late. I knew we weren't gonna get that many results, but I did also stay up till like probably midnight there.
I can't blame you. I did the same thing. Like I didn't get any sleep on election night, and then I was like, maybe there's a chance. Maybe they'll call this. Maybe they'll finally like release us from the suffering. But that was naive of me to think that. So I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, moving on to our next question, though, we were concerning the topic of just endless noise about the election and endless coverage and being plugged in 24/7. With such a myriad of noise concerning the election coverage, what are some ways that you would recommend for students to cut through that noise so that they can get to the real issues and get what's really happening?
Yeah. I think the first thing that people needed to realize coming into this election was that it was going to be an election night like no other. I know I personally told people don't expect results on election night. I did not follow my own advice, but but I guess I should have heeded it. Yeah, we were. It was pretty unlikely that we're going to get a victor on that first night. Just the amount of mail-in votes, the amount of early votes, really the difference between states and how they're counting them was going to contribute to just a lot of uncertainty. I think network news, a lot of print publications online had been doing a relatively good job at kind of keeping that in mind. I don't watch much cable news. The little I did see, though, I was a bit disappointed. For example, I think there was a lot of commentary toward the beginning of like, Joe Biden is leading in South Carolina. This is insane. That was not going to hold. That, if I remember correctly, that was mostly just early ballot and mail-in ballots. So I think just as hard as it is to not kind of reload your Twitter page every single second, I think it'll probably be best if you just kind of view the election from a 30,000 feet above view to kind of keep in mind those like ever-changing things that we just haven't seen in previous elections.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice, because all through the night on Twitter, and I like you said, I did not heed my own advice. I was on Twitter all night. I was watching it, but all through the night, you see people dropping their hot takes.
Yeah.
Or they're like, here's the path that this could take it. Oh, it's decisive. He's taken this state and stuff. And you're like, no, he's not, dude. Like, yeah, were the 500 retweets worth it to just throw out something that's totally going to be proven as wrong in 15 minutes? You know, like, it's there is no predicting. That's the one thing I think everyone should have learned from 2016, especially when the election involves Donald Trump, is there's no predicting it. You have to just kind of take the news as it comes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that. I think that this election, though, might probably be messing with people's rationality versus their emotions. Like I said, I didn't follow my own advice. I think the people that I probably told that advice to also didn't follow it. I think it's just really high stakes. I think there's a national anxiety to know these results for good reason. And I mean, forecasts coming into this event predicted Donald Trump with a 10% chance of winning, right? It also predicted around a 10% chance of just a Joe Biden landslide. I think press coverage really focused on the 10% chance that Donald Trump would win. And while mathematically those two scenarios may have been similar, I think it is probably best practice to focus on the 10% chance of a second Donald Trump term, because I think that's just so much more significant. And I think people know that. I think people in polls, people have shown that they believe that Donald Trump had a good chance at winning the second term. And I think that's what is kind of motivating so much desire to get these last or the soonest results as possible, and kind of that F5 mood of just refreshing Twitter every 10 seconds. So I think it's might not be rational. I think it's understandable. And I think it's something that we're all kind of going through and dealing with at the moment.
Absolutely. So now that we got like the easy question out the way, Nick, we're gonna I'm gonna have to grill you a little bit, all right? So we're gonna jump in and get a little more wonky. So I want to explore, like, what do you think happened? So we had previously mentioned expectations for a blue wave and a sweep. Some people believing there's going to be a sweep for the Democrats. I think that argument for Democrats to make that this is a repudiation on the Trump administration is one that they cannot make. And I have that position just given if you're at least a Democrat, if you're looking at the perspective of a Democrat, the disastrous response for the Senate and the House. They have lost ground in the House and they have failed to reclaim the Senate as of right now. And at least according to trends, it's not looking like they're going to be able to flip it. So given that, I find it hard for Democrats to be able to make the argument that, like, even if Biden wins, regardless of how he wins, if it's barely over or if it's a little bit more, I don't think they can make that argument that they, we rejected Trump. Like, you rejected the man specifically, but the Republican Party as it has existed under Trump, I think is firmly still within place.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was kind of gonna get at, like that last thing that you mentioned. I think Trump, the person, Trump, the president, I think probably has been repudiated. I guess you might call it Trumpism that a lot of the Republican Party has leaned toward. I think, yeah, you're completely right that there hasn't been as much of a backlash to that. I mean, you have Maine, for example, right? That's already been called in Joe Biden's favor. Susan Collins was able to beat Sarah Gideon, the Democratic challenger then there. And so I think you're right. I think the mark that Trump left on the party is probably going to remain. I think the party probably sees the Trump base as one that they can keep kind of trying to strengthen in upcoming years. And I think they might do so in a way that's rhetorically not as inflammatory. So then I agree. I think if you're looking at, and there's already been some reporting, the DCCC, for example, that kind of is in charge of kind of coordinating House of Representatives races, they look like they are not in trouble to lose their majority, but they were expecting to strengthen their majority. And I think there's been a net loss, like you mentioned. And so there's already been some reporting that there's a lot of finger pointing going on in that organization about what happened. Chair of the DCCC, I think I just read, kind of paraphrasing here, she kind of said that the political environment that we were waiting just didn't materialize. I think they expected it to be a lot more 2018 like, where you got that initial blue wave. It was more of a 2016 kind of an electorate, and I think that's just the gravity that Donald Trump probably has on the race. So I think you're right with that assessment, that I don't think Trump might leave if the projections pan out the way they seem to be panning out, but Trumpism, I think, is probably here to stay.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think just real quick before we button this specific point up, let's kind of explore the last thing you said, that Democrats were expecting 2018 turnout. They were expecting that blue wave that swept them into the majority for the midterms. Why don't you think that materialized for them?
Well, first, I think turnout has been actually really great for Democrats.
We mentioned that in the previous segment, Daniela. Overall turnout has been fantastic. This is the biggest turnout we've had, I think, in U.S. history, just broadly speaking, just in terms of like pure votes.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Yeah. I think turnout has been great for Democrats. The bad thing for them is turnout has been great for Republicans. I think you kind of have, you might argue that you do have a blue wave, you just have a red wave at the same time. And so you have this tidal warfare, I guess. In terms of why it's different 2018 to 2020, I think kind of alluded to this. I think Trump just brings in a lot of gravity, I think, to the race. I think it's just so much more pertinent, the whole race, to a lot of people. I think 2018, obviously midterm is bound to have lower attention. I think that's more where Democrats, but I mean Democratic voters probably saw more of a possibility policy-wise to counteract the first 2 years of Trump. And I think they kind of jumped on that opportunity by delivering kind of a split Congress. In 2020, I think you see Trump supporters kind of, this is high stakes, right? Because a lot of Trump's appeal, in my opinion, is not so much about policy. It's about the rhetoric that is used to enact a lot of that policy. And so you can perhaps lose the House of Representatives, and you even have more of a target there with Nancy Pelosi kind of getting to that position of power. But if you lose the presidency and you lose Trump specifically, I think that's just higher stakes. And so I think that's why you had a kind of counteracting red wave, and I think that's something that I don't think democratic kind of leaders organized for or planned for.
I really like that point that you made, Nicolas, and I kind of want to bounce off of that a little bit because I think it's kind of important. And I'm not saying this as a defense of Trump or as a defense of the Republican Party, but I think in a way, analyzing his popularity, you have to separate him from the Republican Party. Obviously, he's a Republican president, but just in the last 48 hours, we've seen people outside, in the streets chanting "Fox News sucks." As for supporters of a Republican president to be chanting "Fox News sucks," that kind of shows that maybe his appeal is his appeal to his base is more him, and it's less about his policies in a way. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm exactly articulating what I want to say because we're in such a crazy couple of days right now with everyone going back and forth. But I think there is a certain aspect of his appeal that's just about him, where he could have run as an independent and there would be a chunk of his supporters that are just following him because it's like, yeah, Celebrity Apprentice. You know what I mean? Like the rhetoric, as you said, is more of what they're voting for, less so the policies. So I think in order to analyze sort of Trump's popularity, you have to separate him from the Republican Party, because I'll tell you this much right now, and I'm trying to look at this from a completely objective point of view. The Republican Party is going to separate themselves from him as soon as he's out of there. There's no way you can bounce off of Trump's presidency and try and follow that up once he's gone. He's a fluke. The rhetoric is not followable. And also, I would like to make one last point of, Nicolas, when you said it's a red and blue wave and you said tidal warfare, if there are any major news networks watching this podcast right now, hire this man. Because that was great. That was great.
It'll make for a good headline. No, I do agree. I think you're already starting to see that. Mitch McConnell, who obviously won his Kentucky race, is presumably gonna maintain his role as Senate Majority Leader. He's already kind of starting to drop some hints there. He said that it was a little reminiscent of after 2012 when Mitt Romney lost. The Republican Party kind of came up with what they call now like a famous postmortem of what went wrong. And they talk about how they need to appeal more to minority voters. They kind of very explicitly said that those voters feel like the Republican Party does not want them. And I don't have the exact quote with me, but Mitch McConnell said something quite similar to that. He said that we need to appeal to a lot of voters that didn't vote for us. It sounds like, to me, it had a tone of a bit of defeatism for the presidency, at least. I think he's more inclined to say that now that, like you guys mentioned, the Senate is safer for them. I think he can kind of chalk up Trump's losing to Trump himself. And like you said, Andy, I think the Republican Party is going to be quick to separate themselves from Trump himself, a controversial figure. And I think you said the rhetoric can't be replicated. I agree that it can't be replicated. I think they're going to try, nonetheless, to try to do that. Some other figure that kind of engages in a lot more dog whistling is possible, but I think that's kind of what I'm seeing from the reporting that's come out so far.
I agree with you, and I'll just say right now, and in 4 years, you can come back to this and you can say I either called it or you can say I completely missed the mark. But in 4 years, when the next race comes around, I am really not looking forward to seeing either Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz try and do a Trump imitation for 6 months or for a year and a half. I'm really not looking forward to that.
I want to jump in on that because I think you make a really good point, like both of you like bringing this up. I agree that I think that the Republicans are gearing up, like we saw from Mitch McConnell and Marco Rubio recently, just in their statements. I think the Republicans are ready to drop Trump as the man Trump on a dime. But I actually think that they're going to keep everything about Trumpism is going to stay. In fact, it is a permanent, I think, a fixture of the Republican Party. I think there's a lot you can say about Mitch McConnell, whether regardless how you feel about him. But one thing you for sure can say is that he is efficient. He knows how to read the tides of riding the waves of power and like maintaining that for the party. And what I think we're going to see if Trump in fact loses is, like you guys said, they're going to drop him. But I think the Republican Party has already permanently shifted towards a Trump mindset, and specifically, like you brought up with Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell sympathizing with it. I think we've already seen it. I think exit polling, which we're going to get into later with other guests, I think exit polling is showing that Republicans are expanding their base. Like, you know, a lot of people will point out that you know, Trump is purely a white identitarian kind of like figure, at least in that appeal. And I'm not going to disagree with that fully. But I think that is untrue to an extent that it's purely that. I think we've seen that the Republicans, just this election cycle, have expanded their base with Black and brown voters. Not significantly, minorities still overwhelmingly voted for Democrats, but still we've seen those numbers increase under Trump from 2016. So that means from the time that he's become president, he's done better with minority communities than he did when he first ran. So I think that we're seeing the Republican Party shift to include everything that they've gained. If they've gained a lot, I don't think that's why they care too much about Trump, because they've already gotten the Supreme Court, they already kept the Senate, and they've expanded their base to include more people to kind of shore up those areas where they were lacking demographic-wise. So I agree with you. I just want to just throw it out there that I think that the Republican Party's forever changed, and it's the mark of Trump, the stamp of Trump is going to be on the Republican Party moving forward. What they do with that, whether or not they try to run somebody who is the exact opposite or someone who's a little more in lane with Trump, rhetorically, like Josh Hawley, that remains to be seen. But real quick before we let you go, Nick, on that topic, how do you think that the Democrats are going to be shaped by this election?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think how Biden governs is going to be really shaped by how the Republican Party kind of, I guess, adapts to a Trump loss. I think there is going to be, first of all, I'm more hopeful of a stimulus package, first of all, for COVID-19 relief, kind of maybe even before a Biden presidency. I think that's going to be one where I think that's just going to be kind of an initial maybe show of faith between the two parties, and it might stop there. I kind of view these first 2 years of a Biden term, if in a maybe Biden term, we're obviously speaking, we might know later in the future, but a first 2 years of a hypothetical Biden term, now knowing the lack of a Democratic landslide throughout, I think might mirror significantly President Obama's last 2 years, with a gridlocked Congress, with a Senate. We don't know still about the Senate because it seems like Georgia's going to have 2 runoff elections in January, but definitely not the, at least these first 2 years, not the FDR-sized presidency that I think a lot of people were maybe expecting from a Joe Biden presidency, especially kind of with the crises we're facing right now. So I think how the Democratic Party adapts to this, I think they notice their weakness in probably with the Latino vote, maybe not so much with the Mexican and Central American vote in more toward the West in Texas and Arizona, probably more with the Cuban American vote, with the Colombian American vote, which I have personally, Venezuelan vote in the Miami-Dade county in Florida. Hillary Clinton won that by 30%. I think Joe Biden barely leads by around 10% or led by 10%. So I think maybe taking a more granular approach to the Latino vote might be their game plan from now on. I expect, I don't know if a Republican Senate would be necessarily kind of in lockstep with this, but I expect some policy that rewards the Black community, because I mean the Black community has saved Joe Biden's campaign in the primaries, obviously in South Carolina, and now the jump in Michigan and Wisconsin that you saw from Tuesday night to now Thursday. That's all Detroit specifically has been pointed out as kind of the city that kind of delivered Michigan to Joe Biden. So I think I think the Democrats have to keep track of that base. I know there's been a lot of criticism already of the Democrats, kind of the Lincoln Project Democrats, maybe trying to appeal so much to a moderate, maybe disenchanted um, Republican group, but that's not their base. And I think they were kind of going under the assumption that this, and maybe it is true, maybe that did appeal to suburban voters, but their base is minority voters, minority women specifically. Like you mentioned, there's been some movement from Black and brown people to Trump, and so I think minority women especially are the Democrats' base. I think there's going to be some more policy that I guess aims to politically reward that community. I don't know if that'll come to fruition, but I think that should be the Democrats' plan going forward.
Interesting. I mean, one can hope. I think Democrats, that's definitely something that they would want to happen. Personally, just speaking as an independent and as a Black man, I am very skeptical. I'm very skeptical of the Democrats' reflection in this moment. I think they definitely can see the wounds. I just don't know whether or not that's going to manifest into them shifting their policies, just given the lack thereof in terms of, like, broadly speaking, the campaigns ran by like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. They definitely improved in some areas, but I feel like there were still some critical mistakes. So I'm very doubtful that they're going to manifest anything too significant in terms of, like you said, rewarding those communities, recognizing where they are, because the Lincoln Project to me just kind of crushes any doubt. And I would point to that for anybody who tries to tell me that, like, oh no, they're for sure going to, do that and recognize who's their base, because they didn't, and they did it in a way that at least if you're a Democrat, I think you should look at the Lincoln Project as an abject failure and as like a waste of like money and resources, at least from my perspective, personally speaking. But yeah, we will see. I think the broad answer is like, we will see.
That's
yeah, no. I was just gonna say, I think there's been a lot of clowning on Mike Bloomberg, especially all the money kind of poured into Florida and Texas now. But yeah,
right.
I think
like, where's that $1 billion?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, with that, we don't want to take too much more of your time, Nick, but we definitely want to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being on the program. I love having this discussion with you. We need to have you on again in the future. If, hopefully when things kind of shake out, we have a better, clear idea of what's going on. We want to have you back on. But Nicolas Hernandez, thank you so much. Where can people find you on Twitter?
You can find me on Twitter. Let me get my handle, @_Nicolas HDZ. And it's also obviously on the Poly Post as well. I kind of write bi-weekly articles. We'll see on that, but yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
Thank you, we really, really, really appreciate it, and I cannot wait to parrot some of the points that you made, so I sound like I know what I'm talking about in conversation. So
I'll be looking forward to hearing the final product. It sounds like you guys have some great guests.
Absolutely. So again, everybody, make sure you follow Nick. Make sure you follow the Poly Post. Nick has amazing articles. He has great coverage, and I expect nothing less than the best moving forward as things kind of teeter out with this election. So with that, Nick, thank you so much again for joining us, and we're going to move on to our next guest.